If you're looking for a way to reconfigure your Arcjet configuration without having to redeploy your application, this is the video for you. My name is Ben Deckerai. I'm the head of developer relations at Arcjet, and I want to show you how we can take a Node.js application and use LaunchDarkly in order to define our Arcjet configuration. Let's jump right into it. In a previous video, we set up Arcjet with Node.js. If you want to get that up and running, there's a link up in the corner. We're going to be using that as a starting point for this. And we're going to add LaunchDarkly as a method for defining feature flags, but instead of using them as features, we're going to use them to configure the way that Arcjet is going to work for us. So let's have a quick look at the code, remind ourselves of what's happening, do a couple of little additions to it, and then we'll have a look at the integration with LaunchDarkly. We jump over to our code, we'll see the index.js we used before. We created a fixed window in the last one. We'll keep it that way for now. This video also has an accompanying blog post, which I'll link in the description below. And in there, we're using the sliding window rate limiting instead of the fixed window, but the theory still holds. One thing I do want to add here, though, is we're going to add in shield protection. We want to be able to protect our application against common web vulnerabilities. And the configuration we need to put in there is mode live. So this means that if a vulnerability is detected by Arcjet, it's actually going to recommend for the application to stop and deny access rather than dry run, which is just going to show you in the dashboard what's going on, but allow your application to continue. Let's just close that off. So we've now got shield in mode live. We've got a fixed window, which is also in mode live, and we're defining a 60-second window during which 5 requests are allowed. The 6th will be rejected.
So the only other thing I'd like to change now is down here where we're returning an error response. We're returning, unfortunately, not rate limited, but if we're blocking due to shield, then we will give a different response. So if we have a look at decision reason, we can see here if it is due to being shield, then we can return a result status. Return a result status of 403, and we'll send the message access denied. Otherwise, we'll continue with the rate limit error we had before.
I'm happy with this code as it is, but the values for the rules here, the whether or not it's live, how long the window is, and what the maximum number of requests in that window, they're all hard-coded in our application. Most of the time, that's fine. And in order to change that, we would modify the code and then push that out and do a redeployment. In this video, though, we're going to have a look at ways that you can dynamically set these without having to redeploy. And you could stand up your own database and put the values in there and pull that out during runtime. We're going to be using LaunchDarkly for that. So what we need to do is define 4 flags in LaunchDarkly, 1 for the shield mode and then the 3 for fixed window. Let's jump over to LaunchDarkly now and get those set up. I have a new LaunchDarkly project here. I've called it Arcjet Demo. And as you can see, we don't have any flags set up yet. So if we come over and we click on Create Flag up at the top here, we're going to give it a name. So for this one, we want to set the shield mode. So let's call this shield mode. And we want it to not be a temporary flag. We're going to be using this ongoing. There's no reason why this is going to disappear in the future. We could define JSON for the entire configuration, but because I want to be able to control each aspect of the Arcjet configuration, I'm going to define these 4 separately. So this one's going to be a string, and the options were live, and we'll just give it the same value and the name, and dry run. We jump down to the bottom, hit create flag, and then turn it on. This is now active and ready for us to go. So we'll review and save. We'll save those changes. We come back into flags and go to create flag again. We now need to create a live or dry run mode for the fixed window. We also want to do the maximum and the interval for that. So I'm just going to go through quickly and get those set up. Now for the max and interval, these aren't going to be strings, these are going to be numbers. Most of the time when we're in regular serving mode, we will want people to have, say, 60 requests per minute. But in a case where we want to actually lock things down and increase that rate limiting to reduce the amount of traffic that we get to our applications, we might want to have a locked down version where we only allow 5 requests per minute. Fixed window interval is also going to be a number. And again, in a regular situation, we might have the window of time be 60 seconds. If we really want to lock this down, again, with the maximum number of hits, we set that to 5 in a 60-second period. If we really want to lock down the window of time, then we can say that maybe those 5 can only be done within a 2-minute period, protecting our application against that really heavy traffic if that's what we're experiencing. So we now have our 4 flags. We've got the fixed window interval, max, and mode. We've got our shield mode. Let's integrate LaunchDarkly's SDK into our application so we can pull those in. So if we come up to our drop-down up here, we'll see that under the Arcjet demo, I've got an option to see my environments. We've got a production and a test environment. We're going to be using a test environment, so I'm going to copy this SDK over here. If we jump back into our code and open our env file, we're going to add this in as a key for us to use in our application. So with that in place, we can now close this out and install the LaunchDarkly SDK. Because this is a Node.js application, we're going to install the Node.js SDK. So if we stop our application over here and we install LaunchDarkly/Node Server SDK, that'll start going in the background. And now we want to create a local library file that's going to encapsulate all of the LaunchDarkly code that we need. So let's come in here and we'll create a new file. We'll put this in a lib directory and we'll call this LaunchDarkly. And the first thing we want to do at the top is pull in the LaunchDarkly SDK, and we're going to pull in all the methods on that. The next thing we're going to do is instantiate the LaunchDarkly client. And when we initialize it, we pass in the SDK key so it can make that connection for us. So this is now instantiated as a singleton. The next thing to do is to provide a method that our application can use to get the Arcjet configuration information from LaunchDarkly through those flags. So we'll export a function get Arcjet config. And the first thing we want to do is wait to make sure that LaunchDarkly has been initialized. So we will await client wait for initialization. That's exactly what we're looking for. One thing we do want to pass in here, though, is a timeout. And the timeout's actually in seconds, so we're going to give it 1 second. There we go, 1 second in order to make that connection. If not, it's going to time out. And what actually happens, as we'll see in a second, is we get to define some defaults in our application, just in case we're not able to make that connection in a timely fashion to LaunchDarkly. The next we want to do is define a context. And LaunchDarkly looks at a context in terms of what do we know about the user that's currently accessing the system. And when you're using LaunchDarkly for feature flags and other things, you might have multiple contexts. You might have certain people who are logged in, or they might be logged out, or there's various reasons why you might want to target different groups of people in different ways. In our case, we want to target everybody the same. We have configuration in LaunchDarkly for our Arcjet configuration, and we want to pull that out regardless of who's accessing the system. So we're going to define the context that just says the user is a guest, because that's going to be true for everybody who's using our application. Now we're ready to start pulling in our 4 flags. So the first flag we want is the shield mode. The shield mode is, that actually looks very nice to start off with. So we're going to be passing the context in as a parameter there. The flag that we gave it was called shield mode. And the default value, if we're not able to make that connection, we want that to be live. And then we can just duplicate this a few times. We want this one to be fixed window mode. We also want that to default to live if we're not able to make the connection. And then we have the fixed window max and fixed window interval. And if we're not able to make that connection, I'm going to say the default should be that we get 60 requests every minute. So I'm just going to format that so we can see it a bit more. We've got those 4 values coming in down there now. And now we just need to return that configuration. So I'm just going to return the actual values as they come in. Exactly that auto completion there. So we're going to pass those 4 values back out, which means that we will now be able to pull those in and use that as a definition for our Arcjet object. So if we jump back over here, we've got our window and our max. I called it interval. Window is the same in that case. So we've got 5 requests per minute. We want these now to be defined by the LaunchDarkly configuration. We can't pull that in at this time here. We're going to have a synchronization issue. We need to make sure that the flags are pulled in first, and then Arcjet is initialized with that data. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to take this out altogether and define no rules to start with. And then what we can do is we can use the with rule method on top of the Arcjet object to add rules dynamically during runtime. So if we come in here and we say, let's get the Arcjet config to be equal to get Arcjet config, that should have automatically pulled in from up here now. So we're getting Arcjet config from LaunchDarkly. We're now going to get that information back. Now what we can do with our AJ object is we can now, as I mentioned before, run a with rule on top of it. So before we hit protect here, we can come in and run with rule. With rule will take one of the primitives that we provide. In this case, the first one we want to add is shield, and shield, as we saw above, takes a parameter of mode, and the value of that is going to be Arcjet config shield mode. Then we want to add another rule, and this one is going to be the fixed window. And the information that gets passed in here, it's pretty close. We're going to have the mode, which is the fixed window mode. We've got max, and then remember this one here was actually window, which we called window interval. If we reformat that, we're adding those 2 rules on dynamically based on the information we're getting from LaunchDarkly, and then we're going to call protect request on that. So if we hit save on this and we restart our application, now we can see we've got this open LaunchDarkly stream. We've got our local host application over here. If we jump back into our application and hit refresh here, we should now notice when we go back to our LaunchDarkly dashboard that we have a context that's come through. Now, if you're following along at home, this can actually take about half a minute to a minute to come through. You can see here that in my example, the request was 40 seconds ago, and it only just showed up for me. So it takes a while for it to show up in the board, but it should be there within about a minute. And we can see now that a user of type guest has made a request to our application, which has then caused our application to ask LaunchDarkly for configuration information, which has been used to configure the Arcjet configuration. And if we jump in and we have a look at what's going in here, we can see that we can make changes to these flags, or in our case, the configuration, per context. So if I wanted to come in now and change the interval to reduce the rate limit, so I'm going to get fewer requests per minute, if I hit refresh on this 3 or 4 times, we'll see I'm still getting a hello world through, and that's fine. If we jump over and have a look at the requests that are turning up in our Arcjet dashboard, we'll see all of these requests that come through. And we can even jump in and confirm that the configuration had rate limiting set to a maximum of 60 within a window of 60 seconds. So let's lock that down and see how that affects things without having to redeploy, or in our case, restart the application. We can come in and say, okay, well, the window max was 60 requests per minute. We're going to lock that down to be 5 requests per minute. And we could also then lock this down to say, well, the interval should be 2 minutes instead of 1 minute. In our case, it doesn't really matter. We're going to hit those 6 requests pretty quickly, but we can really lock this down, review and save those changes to LaunchDarkly. And this has now taken effect already. So if I come back in over here, we'll see that the first request has arrived. And if we look at the details here, we can confirm that it's now a maximum of 100 or a window of 120 seconds with a maximum of 5. So it's already taken effect. If I hit refresh another 5 times, we'll get that rate limit exceeded. And we can see that we've had a total of these 4 extra requests. So the first one that we made under the new configuration, 4 more, and then the 6th one was rate limited. I hope that's given you an idea of how you can use LaunchDarkly to configure the Arcjet rules, and how you can make changes to those rules in real time without having to redeploy your application. I look forward to hearing from you how this has worked out for you. Let us know in the comments below. Join us on Discord, where you can ask us questions and talk to us directly. And until next time, have fun.